Welcome to Informed Dissent, where we work all year to make sure Jack Turban only gets coal in his stocking. I'm Lauren Legere here with Jamie Reed and Corey Cohn, and this is your news of the week for December 6th, 2025. Happy Friday, friends. Here is your end of the week briefing. In Texas, SB 8, the Texas Women's Privacy Act, is now in effect. It requires multi-occupancy bathrooms and locker rooms in public facilities to be separated by sex. Jails, prisons, and certain family violence shelters must also operate on a sex-based bias. Trans activists call it discriminatory, but many women are calling it long overdue. Also in Texas, SB 12 passed, which bans K through 12 DEI programs and prohibits instruction or programming related to sexual orientation or gender identity. It also bars student clubs centered on those themes, which means gay-straight alliances may be pushed out entirely. School districts like Conroe ISD are already citing SB 12 to reject parental requests regarding pronouns. Some schools are interpreting the law as permission to scrub even supportive references of lesbian, gay, and bisexual identities. The result, a landscape where gender ideology may be constrained, but LGBT kids may also find their communities shrinking. In Colorado, 4 families have sued Jefferson County School District after an 11-year-old girl on a school trip was assigned to share a hotel bed with a male classmate who identifies as transgender. The district's policy reportedly assigns rooms based on gender identity and forbids informing parents. The core question: does an 11-year-old girl have the right to not share a bed with a boy? For these parents, they say, yes, she does. In California, Mirabelli versus Olson has been certified as a class action suit. The issue is simple. Can schools socially transition a child while prohibiting teachers from telling parents? Districts say yes, parents and long-standing Supreme Court precedent say no. This case will determine whether parental rights or district secrecy policies prevail statewide. So this is a big one for California. Texas Tech has joined Texas AMA in restricting how faculty can discuss race, sex, and gender. Professors are barred from promoting the view that there are more than 2 sexes, and materials touching gender identity face heightened review. Depending on who you ask, this is either a needed accountability measure or a worrisome expansion of political oversight. Either way, things in higher ed are shifting and rapidly. Lior Sapir at the Free Press reported on confidential WPATH and USPATH conference videos obtained through discovery in Doe v. Marshall. These videos show clinicians openly acknowledging they are improvising irreversible interventions on minors with almost no data and no coherent ethical framework. Experimental surgeries without outcome data, discussions of operating on patients with psychosis or multiple personalities, surgeons encouraging colleagues to perform elective castrations, and the line that sums up the whole field: we're all just winging it. Now, to our deep dive this week, the New York Times profiled a cancer patient, Jennifer Capasso, a 42-year-old man who identifies as a woman, who secretly recorded clinicians at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Staff were grappling with the obvious clinical problems caused by listing Capassos as female, a pregnancy test on a male body, confusion about cancer risk, lab reference ranges, and image interpretation. The Times frames this as discrimination. What it actually reveals is a profession trying to use accurate medical information to keep a patient alive. Medicine runs on biological sex, and you cannot dose chemo or analyze labs if the record is fiction. Capasso sued, but the truth remains: identities don't get cancer, bodies do. In our first segment, we'll be joined by Glenna Goldis, friend of the pod, attorney, writer of Substack Bad Facts, and co-founder of the Gender Critical Law Society, to discuss this article. Then in our second segment is journalist Ben Ryan, one of the most respected health reporters in the country. His work on HIV, infectious disease, and public health has appeared everywhere, and he brings clarity, rigor, and a humanity to complex medical stories. That's it for your news of the week. On to the show.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Informed Dissent. This morning, we have an amazing guest for our deep dive. Um, Glenna is with us again. We wanted to talk about two New York Times happenings that occurred this week. The first one is a story that came out on Monday, and that was what first prompted us to ask you to come, Glenna. I thought, ooh, this is a legal one. We need Glenna. And then, much to, I think, a lot of our interest, we saw Ross come out with a sit down interview with Chase Strangio
Ross
this week as
Dothett.
well. How do you say Ross's last name?
I say it. Dothett.
Dothit?
That's how I say it.
Okay. So we want to go into both of these pieces. We've got about an hour, so I don't need to keep talking. I want to let you all jump in. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the surgery piece because I know we all have plenty to say about Strangio.
Glenna, do you want to give us an overview?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
go for it.
yeah. So there was a lawsuit filed against one of the big hospitals here in New York City, Memorial Sloan Kettering, known for its cancer treatments, known as like this world-renowned cancer center. Its patient uh, goes by Jennifer Capasso, sued for two reasons. There's a whole lot of stuff you'll read in the article, but I'm going to start with the law is just actually kind of straightforward. Two types of claims this person has, and this person is a man who pretends to be a woman. And he says, one, that his medical records said in some form that he was male. And we'll get into the details of that. And then second, he says that he was misgendered by the healthcare providers there on multiple occasions. So he said that, nurses referred to him as he, him. He said that a colorectal surgeon referred to him as he, him during a conscious operation when the patient was conscious. And so those are the two big, accusations of misconduct. It's misgendering and it's like the word male showing up in his records. And this supposedly violates two laws. So one is the New York State human rights law, and the other is the New York City human rights law. So that's it. Pretty simple, if, very debatable, but I think you get it, what's going on legally. And then if you talk about the New York Times article, it goes into all these kind of curly cues and weird drama, and it turned out that the guy was secretly recording his providers when he was under anesthesia, so they thought he was knocked out and he was, but he recorded them talking and saying things like seeming surprised when they saw his genitals and saying like what's going on here, and then saying wait a minute, his records say that he's female. He took a pregnancy test before this, and his lawsuit leaves that out, but that was in the New York Times article, that he'd actually like apparently for whatever reason, people thought he was female or thought this was the right procedure. They had him take a pregnancy test before the surgery, and he did.
How'd it go?
Yeah, the results are non-binary, still figuring it out. What? Right. And so and actually, I want to say before I go forward, and I think we all feel this way, is that I'm keeping in mind that this patient here has a horrible medical diagnosis. He's going through a nightmare, and he has been for about 5 years in terms of he has now metastatic stage 4 colorectal cancer, and he's had issues with different organs as well, lots of surgeries, and so I'm very sympathetic to that, and I'm sorry that he's going through all of it. But I'm still talking about it, and I'm still pointing out all the problems of what he's saying for several reasons. This is a lawsuit that could have like a big impact, definitely in New York City, New York State, possibly nationally, and how hospitals treat not just trans-identified patients, but everybody, because we all have sexes, actually, even the non-binary people. So it's a matter of public importance. It's going to influence hospitals. It is no doubt stressful for all of the healthcare providers involved. He's seen like a bazillion different people at this one hospital, and he's accusing many of them of like horrible bigotry, is what many liberals see it as and what their employer might see it as. Going forward, he's continuing to stress them out because not only will they be deposed and all that, but he is still a patient at the hospital. So every time he goes in and he interacts with all the many people that one does in that situation, they're all going to be under a microscope and very nervous about what's going on and how to address him. Some of the complaints are just things like, well, I think that you were nicer to this other patient than you were to me. So kind of vague accusations that could apply to just about anybody, subjective. Another point to keep in mind is that he has had female roommates. At least one is mentioned in his lawsuit. So it's the fact that he's pretending to be female is not a sort of victimless act. There are women who have their own extreme medical struggles, and they are being put in and they're his roommates. They have a male roommate
Oh,
You mean in the
so
hospital?
we need to
in the
clarify.
hospital.
In
Yes,
the
sorry.
hospital setting.
Yes.
So in what would often be a post-surgical sex-based rooming situation, he would be coming out of surgery post-surgical and then roomed with a woman who was also post-surgical. And in that setting, you were often only in a gown, exposed, but for a curtain in between. Yeah. Yeah. Now at first I think Corey, your face too. I was like,
Yeah. Didn't this
oh,
guy
is
have like
that
a lung transplant or something?
Yeah, he has some kind of lung surgery. It was one of his surgeries. Yeah.
Yeah. I assume somebody who's just had their lungs replaced is probably not going to be much of a threat.
Well, yeah, it's not just threat. I mean, a lot of women just don't want to have a male roommate, especially in New York City. We have a very diverse population, so there could be
Yeah.
religious reasons. I mean, it could just be jarring if you wake up after surgery and you hear a man's voice and you look and you see a male figure next to you.
Right, and you're
Oh,
mostly
okay.
naked underneath your hospital gown.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
Glenna,
mean, if the hospital's telling you this is a female ward, it should be female. The hospital's lying to you if they do that.
It's female. I thought, see, I always thought this was a UK thing. This is the first time that it struck me as
no,
actually a thing in the.
rooming? No, sex-based rooming in hospitals is not something that's only in the UK. So there are often hospitals now where you will have, if you have the insurance coverage, a lot of hospitals have moved to individual rooming only, where your room is your room only. A lot of
Yeah.
times that's the case. That is not the circumstance in older hospitals, hospitals that rely primarily on Medicaid or Medicare funding, hospitals that serve very rural areas or very, very urban areas are still going to have sex-based rooming. And and if I could pivot slightly, one of the things that was captured on the audio recording, which Glenna, I'll pitch it back to you so you can talk a little bit about what happened there, is that the hospital staff were discussing that there was no clear policy. And even in the hospital settings I've worked in, there has been no clear policy on rooming assignments, who gets to choose which sex-based rooming assignments are given. But I will state that most hospitals still were operating under women get housed with roomed with other women, especially post-surgical. Men get, if you're going to be sharing rooms in that sort of stratification. Sorry, Glenn, I jumped ahead.
Uh, yeah, absolutely, all that. And so a final point about, as we talk about this case, I think it's important because he has a lawyer who filed this for him. This is not just some, lark of one individual who has an extreme view of trans rights. He has a lawyer who is licensed by the state of New York, who is taking this on and made the choice to phrase the lawsuit in very ridiculous ways, as we might talk about. So anytime I make fun of this lawsuit, I'm really making fun of what I read in this document, which was drafted and filed by an attorney.
So can I ask Glenna, what exactly, so he's filing these two complaints based on New York City and New York State's human rights laws.
Yeah.
So what do these laws say? How have they been previously interpreted by the courts? And how could this case change how they are not only interpreted, but acted upon within the state and the city context?
Yeah, great question. So the city and state laws are pretty similar in terms of what was passed by the legislatures. So you have the state legislature, and then you have the city version of that is the city council. And the language is like essentially the same. And then it's also similar to what other states pass for their anti-discrimination rules. So the legislature did not pass rules about quote unquote misgendering. And the legislatures did not say, oh, the hospital has to pretend in your records that you're female. It just says broadly, like no discrimination by gender identity, something like that. And then at the city level, what you have is like an overlay of city agencies, say, interpreting that language. So city agencies, this is bureaucrats saying, oh, well, that means that you have to put in all the records that the person is the sex that they say they are. And that means that you cannot misgender. But that is, some of that is regulation by the agency. Some of it is just guidance by the City Human Rights Commission, which is not like binding law. Once you're in court, you can just challenge that and say, no, that's not what City Council meant to do. But people get confused about it sometimes. They think that that is, and the city, I mean, not just New York City, but many places, they put this on their website, whatever guidance they're providing, and public, including perhaps like, small business owners, they see that and they assume it's the law when it's actually a government interpretation of the law. And so that is why all over the country you see everybody thinking that misgendering is illegal. Well, it's because bureaucrats said that, but you can challenge them in court. The legislatures, other than California, I don't think legislatures would want to pass a law like that. I think that that's why I think that the advocates like draft the bill in a sneaky, vague way. And so that gets everyone to sign on because they're like, oh yeah, I don't think someone should be, for example, evicted just because they think they're the opposite sex. That's what they think they're voting on. But then once it's in place, the bureaucrats come in and put their spin on it. So that's
but then you also have the problem where activist lawyers and activist clients of those lawyers are moving to solidify the interpretation of those laws. Like for this example specifically, they're moving to have the interpretation of those laws like concretized and saying you can't misgender and you can't properly sex someone on medical documents.
Yes,
so that would be the fallout of this in New York State is that you when medically documenting someone's sex, you have to do whatever they say.
Yeah, so right now they're trying to get a precedent that gets a court to interpret it that way. What's interesting for me is that it's taken them a while to bring a case like this. I've just been watching and waiting, and I think I know why. I think they're afraid of getting a bad precedent, a judge that says, "Oh no, that's wrong," and then that has happened in the sports context recently in New York. So I think they want this hanging over everyone's head as a threat. Like I said, the bureaucrats and the government agencies telling everyone what they think the law is. And they don't want to mess that up. But now they've made this move. So I think this could be significant in terms of setting a precedent one way or the other. And if I can give you an example of what the city agency said, so they create like this Bill of Rights. This is back in 2017 because New York City were very advanced. So they say, this one of your rights is to have your gender identity and gender expression recognized, affirmed, and documented, which is crazy because gender expression is supposed to be like the clothes you wear. So like someone else is gonna be documenting the clothes that you wear to your visit. Like I don't even know. So then they say that includes staff members using your name, your pronouns, and mirroring the language you use to describe your body. So you can like refer to your hoo-ha, and then they have to refer to your hoo-ha. Like
that seems
no limitation on what language you use. They have to mirror it.
That's crazy. That's just patently that's absurd.
Gives me lots of ideas for my next political point.
Let me throw this curveball at you too. Is it possible that the reason this case has been taken up is because they have this recording of the interaction between the surgeons and the assistants in the operating room? So walk me through that. How does one record what's going on in their operating room? Like, how did this even happen? I've been in multiple surgeries. I don't have anything personal with me. I'm also anesthetized before I'm rolled into that room, and if not, then I'm just completely out of it anyway. So does this not bring up its own set of problems with maybe HIPAA or something like that? Because essentially, like, how are these surgeons supposed to know that they can't mention any other cases while they're operating on someone? I mean, this just seems a little out there to me that someone got a recording device into an operating room when I don't have my phone with me when I've been operating on. I don't have my clothes. I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. People have been speculating about how this hospital could defend itself or even possibly have a claim against that person. The hospital is not pursuing that. As far as I can tell, it's not in their answer where they're saying that might be because the recording itself is not really central to the legal argument, I don't think. I mean, unless they're trying to say there was kind of animus and kind of basing that on the fact that there was an edge to the nurse's voice when she said something. But it's kind of unclear from the lawsuit what they expect the value of the recording to be. Like, they're saying like, how could they say that in front of the patient? And it's like, well, we all know the patient was unconscious and you do too. So like it's for color. I think it helped them get the New York Times attention, I should say. And I think it was inside a sealed bag with clothing. And I should give you the hospital's take on this, which is like this recording is all muffled and you really can't tell what's going on. You can kind of hear the words male and female, but like, we don't know. And like a lot of things quoted in the lawsuit of that who was recording are kind of ambiguous or not actually bad. It's just like he was referred to as a quote transgender man. Okay, well, that probably wasn't even a malice. People just get that quote unquote wrong all the time. They use the word transgender, not a slur. And he was referred to as a male to female transgender. That is inches or centimeters away from the politically correct terminology of the day. And they're quoting that as though it matters. So, I think it's very salacious that happened. And I think it helped them get the New York Times attention. I don't know what his role will be in the lawsuit.
But do you think that it actually helped him to secure legal counsel because it is going to be sensationalized?
Yeah, that is possible. I mean,
Yeah.
this counsel, Joseph Wardensky, is somebody with a history in LGBTQ rights, as they are called, dating back to the Obama administration. He was in the Department of Justice, and he's claiming credit for their big. It wasn't a lawsuit; it was just kind of a bullying campaign against Arcadia, a school district in California, for not wanting a student to sleep overnight with the opposite sex. So he has that history, and I imagine he was looking for a case, and maybe other lawyers were too. And so, I think he had an eye out for like a good case, probably in New York where he practices. And this was the best case of quote unquote anti-trans discrimination that has happened in the last several years, even though it's really just somebody being quote unquote misgendered. So yeah, I think the recording could have added to that because it's none of these cases are going to be super compelling on their own. And so yeah, I think that could have tipped it and be like, yeah, this is the one we want to take up. This is the one that we're going to choose out of all the options.
But isn't there some like baseline, like, isn't there some baseline for bringing a discrimination lawsuit? Like, wouldn't the hospital have had to, um, medically, like in terms of their service to this individual, wouldn't they have had to not offer services or perform services in
You
a
mean
hostile way?
actually discriminate?
Well,
You mean
yeah,
they
that's what I
literally
mean.
have
Like,
had to discriminate?
isn't there a legal definition of discrimination that this would have to rise to meet
Yeah,
that
so I
bar?
mean, I know what you're getting at. Like, are they? He's not making, in our opinion, he's not making a real legal claim because we don't think it is discrimination to quote unquote misgender. We think the hospital probably has a First Amendment right to refer to a male as a male. Well, the way that would be dealt with in litigation is sure. I mean, you can file any complaint you want in court if you pay the fee, but then the other side moves to dismiss it. And if they're thinking no matter what the facts are, we're entitled to do it, then that's a motion to dismiss. You file right away. And the hospital did not do that. They passed up their opportunity to argue, your legal theory makes no sense. Like, even if we did what you say we did, it wasn't illegal. We're entitled to call you a man. They did not argue that because they're going forward on the idea that, well, he is a woman in a sense.
Okay,
But they,
so if you were this hospital's legal counsel, would you have made that argument?
well, it's not just a question of law, it's a question of business. The healthcare industry, all of it is deeply invested in pretending that these people are women. And that includes, all of the legal infrastructure that comes along with it. You want to be able to enforce the idea that they're women if you're making them. And to be fair, this hospital here is just focused on cancer. So I'm not accusing them of conducting the surgeries themselves. But we know that the whole industry, nobody wants to break ranks and say, wait a minute, we actually think this person is male. They could lose a lot of business, the donors, whatever, like state government be mad at them, federal government in a few years. Like my guess is that they don't want to take a stand and say, like, that's not what this law means. We're entitled to misgender. They might not want that PR.
You think this is because it sounds to me that that would be, in terms of if I were a large hospital with a lot of finances to kind of negotiate, and I had a very quick cut way of cutting this lawsuit off at the pass, that would be the legal argument I make, is that like on its face, you don't have a discrimination argument.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just kind of a microcosm of what's going on in the health industry at all. Like they're putting themselves, they're spending all of this money just to, on the back end, be able to say men are actually women.
Mhm.
I mean, this is insane.
Yeah, and to be clear, even though I
And
think that's what their reasoning is,
it's bad legal tactic, it seems to me. Like I'm not a
because I don't think they
lawyer, but
realize they're opening the floodgates. So if they lose this case, or even if they settle and people find out that they settled and gave money to this guy, floodgates. Literally anybody can say that they're non-binary, they're
yeah.
trans, whatever. Everybody in New York, and that's what they're opening themselves up to, and the rest of the healthcare industry, if they do not squash this lawsuit. And they are not doing everything they can to squash it. Like I said, they did not file that motion to dismiss.
Crazy.
Corey, I know that you read this story and had some reactions to some of the language that the patient was using.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what struck
Sure.
you?
Yeah, this takes us away from the legal stuff for a minute and more into the human part. I know that makes it sound like I'm implying that lawyers aren't human. They're not. So the patient was saying, "Oh, I had to get facial feminization surgery." They had just had a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. They thought that they were terminal and that death was imminent. And their highest priority at this point, or his highest priority at this point, was to have facial feminization surgery, which uh, I know in New York can be up to a 6-figure surgical fee, and that it might have been covered by insurance. I don't know what sort of insurance he had, but it's not impossible that it was public insurance. But in either case, it's just two things that are striking to me. One is if you're a plastic surgeon, your patient shows up, they are actively receiving treatment for stage 4 rectal cancer, and they have a poor prognosis. You're the surgeon and you're going, great. That means we just have to schedule the surgery sooner so that you can heal and, as the patient said, leave a beautiful corpse, right? So the surgeon making the decision to
Yes.
participate in that.
Slow down a minute
Two,
though, Corey.
what's that?
Slow down a minute though. That
Yeah,
was a quote in the piece that this individual made this determination that they want an open casket funeral
yeah,
and they cared about leaving behind that was the quote, a beautiful corpse.
yeah, or a beautiful body or something like that.
So their priority was even do. Can you even
You're breaking
was
up a little bit more.
receiving, is it even ethical to do these types of facial feminization surgeries or any kind of unnecessary surgery when someone is being treated for stage 4 cancer? I mean, this is insane.
Ethical
Well,
for the
that's
patient, ethical for us as a society who we get to determine who gets to use room of the surgical suite, who gets the resources. You mean which
No,
ethic question?
I mean ethical for the surgeon who performed the facial feminization surgery, because don't you have to be in a certain don't you have to meet a certain standard of health before you can do
Mm, health that you can live through the anesthesia, sure. But
oh
not,
Lord.
I mean, but
well, the possibility for complications for these surgeries is pretty high, relatively high. So you have somebody who's battling for their life, and now he's having a procedure that risks complications that makes the rest of his healthcare more difficult. So
Yeah.
that's baffling. If somebody showed up and they said, "Hey, I'm dying of cancer. I'm trying my best to stay alive, but my highest priority right now is that after I'm dead, that my corpse is more presentable in a way that I feel comfortable with right now." To me, that would raise questions about informed consent. Like,
Yes.
is this person competent to even be asking for, like, do their priorities raise the question of whether they can give informed consent? And the third facet, sorry, Jamie, I'm going to present the
Oh,
last one here without pondering that one, is that this was presented neutrally by the New York Times as I don't know. It's just presented. I get it's just baffling to me. What's going
Yeah.
on in the editor's mind here is we should include this quote because there are things that we can't say obviously out loud, and we're going to depend on the readers to see some subtext here. Like what was the forget the writer, what was the editor's mindset in allowing that anecdote to be included? Because it's not even really that important for the story. It's not the focus of the story. So what's the point of including that anecdote?
That he wanted a beautiful corpse. I think that was the wise decision to make in terms of presenting this full story, because it is giving us more to think about. But I will say that there's been some speculation also that the Times was trying to like wink, wink, look, this is crazy by giving us the details they did. I don't
Yeah.
think that's the case because when I read the lawsuit, there's actually crazier details that they tactfully omitted in the Times. So another surgery besides the facial feminization that he received was breast augmentation. And I think he's on estrogen, although I'm not sure that was explicitly said anywhere. So when he went for one of his scans as part of the cancer care, it came back, this was like his torso. The radiologist notes just everything they see, and one of them is gynecomastia. And so that is a big point in the lawsuit, which is like, how dare you say that I have gynecomastia? That is a false diagnosis because I don't have gynecomastia because I'm a woman. So this just
Oh,
proves my whole point that you need to call me a woman, because if you call me a man, then you're going to give me all these false diagnoses.
we got to clip Lauren's face while you're saying that.
It's just
So
it's really it's crazy that that anyone is allowing this to happen to someone who is terminal. That this person is terminal. That cancer, stage 4 colon cancer is not something that you just brush off and go roller skating with. Like this should be your top priority. I mean, what kind of treatment was he receiving for the cancer? Was it chemotherapy? Was it radiation? Because both of those things, I would imagine, present serious risks to having additional surgeries done during that treatment protocol.
I think most of the treatments for the cancer at this point had been surgical. So they were seeking to remove tumor growth from a surgical perspective. I want to go back for a moment though. Corey, you made this thought that maybe the New York Times was giving us the story as a wink, wink, look, this is crazy.
No, I think Glenna put it that way, but that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
Is it possible that they are just so enmeshed in this ideology themselves that they do not themselves realize how crazy it comes off?
Well, that's
Yeah,
what
I
I'm
think that's
wondering.
what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
But I also I'm having, maybe this is just me being weird right now. I've been really interested in what visual images the New York Times has been choosing, what photographs they're putting in stories, especially around this topic of trans. And I actually, there was an image in this story of this supposed folder that he put together. It's a folder containing Capasso's medical documents related to cancer treatments and facial feminization surgery. I saw this photo, and I think I can show it here. This is the folder. It looks like my 11-year-old son did this with fluffy bubble paint, and it says cancer plus FFS, facial feminization surgery.
Yeah.
Um, this alone,
Is the
I
testament to mental illness?
yes,
Yeah.
Ah,
yes, I feel like it was, or some kind of like, I don't know, like I worry about this. Sorry, those things to me are like red flags. Like,
Yeah,
where's your where's your education level? Does this person like, do they even know what they're up against? Do they know what they're fighting for their cancer? It just the whole thing was a really shocking case. Um, I think for time we should pivot over to Chase. Are we ready?
Oh yeah.
oh, Chase, yeah. Can I mention something before we get into the meat of this?
Yes, go.
So we share some of these things on chat, and somebody sent a link to this, and on my phone it was a small thumbnail. So before I even read the text, I saw this thumbnail of this cute young woman that was in the thumbnail, and it took me a second to go, oh, she has little facial hair. Oh, that's Chase.
Chase. Yes,
Well, only pretends to pretend that she's male. This is my whole beef.
Yeah.
She even made
Yeah.
note of it in the interview. She
Yeah.
said, "Oh, I try a little bit to act masculine." I was like,
She was playing it off, yeah, because she pretends in court and in the New York Times that she identifies as male. But she actually is totally, she's like a non-binary supremacist. She thinks it's basic to think that you're male or female. And you can see that in the other interviews that she gives to like the queer press. Even though this is all available on the internet, it's like there's two different worlds. There's, Chase's public normie face and then her
Yeah.
queer face, and it all comes up in the Google, but nobody looks at it. I don't know. Anyway, so Roth thought that believed that she was somebody who pretends to be male, but she actually pretends to be non-binary. And then she was trying to play that off, like, because she knows that this is going to be like an audio-visual situation. So she's like, I know I'm androgynous, like I accept that, but I do try to be male. It's like, why don't you just accept that you're female? If you can accept you're androgynous, like, but whatever. We know she's making this up for the
I'm
New York
sorry,
Times.
why couldn't Chase just have accepted that she's a lesbian?
Yeah.
She said she did temporarily, but she still had a hole in her soul, therefore she must not be a lesbian. Because being a lesbian is supposed to cure everything. If you are a lesbian and you say you're a lesbian, then you don't have any more existential problems for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Well, if something doesn't work, you keep trying it, right?
Okay, so let's set this up for a minute. So this was a recorded, like a sort of mini pod. It was in the opinion section. It was called The Shifting Politics of Transgender Rights. The lawyer and activist Chase Strangio on cultural divisions and common ground. And it was hosted by Ross. And I'm going to say that I have a very huge space in my heart for Ross. Ross completely changed my life. He wrote this piece. He did. He's like one of my, people talk about what piqued you. Ross piqued me completely. Glenna, why are you laughing?
Oh, I actually like him. I actually really like his columns, so I'm only laughing at
Okay.
you. Go
He
on.
wrote this piece that was published April 13th, 2022. I was still working in Pediatric Gender Center, and it was titled How to Make Sense of the New LGBTQ Culture War. And it completely broke my soul. So I really like Ross. Okay, so how did this interview go?
Great
And
for
also,
Chase.
it went what for Chase?
It went great for Chase because her agenda was to show like a nicer side of trans. They're trotting out like a new campaign. Like, look how normal we are and look how willing to compromise we are. And Dothit didn't ask her any hard questions, so she was able to slide by all her usual lies, which lead to the same crazy outcomes that as when she was acting less compromising. But she
I
put a
I
nice
mean,
sheen on it.
I thought he did push back several times in a way that I think that he is aware that the general public is not as in-depth on this topic as we are, and it felt to me that he was slowly walking them through the logic, or rather the illogical premise of trans through Chase. Like when he is questioning her about what is gender identity, she cannot formulate an answer. I mean, she pivots, she kind of wishy-washies around it, but she it's the same old line, which I think to the normies looking at it, you would think, okay, this is an elite ACLU attorney. They should be able to give me a better definition than my teenage kids. And she just doesn't. She just doesn't. I mean, I agree that there could have been more pushback, but also uh, perhaps that again, this is from the New York Times. So any pushback at all is something that is heavily scrutinized within the newsroom there. I thought he did a fairly good job of pushing against some of the more illogical statements that she made, um, and bringing up
My
again, the parents who don't want to have these gender transition procedures done on their young children. I thought he made some pretty good points.
my litmus test
Yeah,
for all journalism about trans, very simple. Does the journalist bring up the physical harms of gender medicine? Do they name a
yeah,
single negative side effect? And Duthit did not do that. He
yeah.
asked,
No,
what is health? That's the closest he got. But no, and the New York Times especially does not go there. I think they literally have a rule against it.
yeah. I mean, the what is health was kind of nebulous because I agree. If he
Yeah,
if he would have come
name
at
one
her
side
and
effect.
said, right, if he would have come at her and said, and I think you did a thread on this where you said, well, what about the rates of incontinence? What about the rates of becoming diabetic for young women? What about the rates of certain tumors? I mean, he could have pushed back
That's the whole
more with
thing.
more,
We don't
right?
make
Like
any
if,
sense. We don't make any
yeah,
sense if there are no medical harms. Like we're
yeah,
crazy people.
yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. If they start saying like, well, we have these documented harms, like it's harder to say, well, we need embodiment goals and this is our
It's the
true
whole
self.
problem.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Otherwise, this is just haircuts. Like, who
I
cares?
did I did think he did a really good job of pointing out that like you want all of it. You want to talk about the metaphysical and the human rights aspect and the medical aspect but you want to be diagnosed with something, but you don't want to be labeled as, having a mental illness. But I thought he did a pretty good job of pointing out that they're asking for all of the exceptions all of the time. Did anyone else get the feeling that how did you feel about the way he that line of questioning?
Again, I think I have way too much of a big heart for Ross here, but there were so many follow-up holes where and I know that I feel like they were both kind of like, we're agreeing to try to start a new cultural framework conversation. Let and here I am doing the
Value.
same thing. Yes, trans is wanting to roll out a new look at us now, we've changed. We're open, what was Chase saying?
Open a compromise.
Open to compromise. I thought, okay, here's one example of a follow-up that Ross missed. Chase says, look, West Virginia, they did this great thing. Yes, they rolled back some of the care, they tightened it up. They said you have to have two letters. They carved out, they tightened it all down. Does Ross know that that carve out is now gone because detransitioners and myself went and explained to the West Virginia lawmakers that this that there's no evidence to do this in anyone, no matter how many assessment letters you get, that we spoke to them and they changed that law. These are the times when I imagine Ross saying, oh, yeah, that did happen. West Virginia did have that law. But then the individuals who were harmed from these interventions went and spoke, and gays and lesbians went and spoke. And now that middle ground that you talked about has been ended. Like,
Right, because these were people who went through these two assessments and still came out and right. I mean, these are people that went through the more narrow, if you want to call it, framework that West Virginia was proposing, and still ended up on the other side of it saying this didn't help my gender dysphoria or I was harmed by this.
well, also part of what I directly spoke to those lawmakers is about is no matter how many assessments you have, there is no true trans child.
Yeah.
You're never going to assess to find this a magical thing. It doesn't exist. And one of the lawmakers straight up said, if you were here the first time around, if we understood this the first time around, we never would have even put in this loophole that Chase was praising, this compromise position that Chase was praising. The other thing that I also found interesting as a mom, Chase was trying to pretend like Chase has changed because Chase is now a parent, although Chase referred to herself as a father. That, oh, now that I'm a parent, I do understand more. I was like, shut up. Like,
She's been a parent this whole time. Her kid is like at least 10, I think.
I'm also like, I think I was listening to this with Lauren, and I think I turned to Lauren and I was like, what is going on for their kid? Because Chase was kind of alluding that their kid is needing a lot of medical care and like maybe getting questionable recommendations. And so I was like, oh, look at how it feels.
I think that was all bullshit. Like that was just like
Yeah.
it was so carefully mapped out how she was going to relate to people. But even while she did that, she was insulting those who opposed gender medicine because she was saying, "Look, I feel anxious and uneducated and stupid sometimes too." Because like, you know, I know it's intimidating when a doctor talks to you and uses the word of a body part that you don't know because you didn't go to college. Like, everything she said was barbed.
So is this a strategy? Did she go through some straight
Yes,
up like hardcore media
this was
training and
huge
told
strategy. Yes, she's been hiding
her
from the media
eyes
forever.
her eyes are reflecting a lot of like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Yes, because she doesn't believe, and I'm not saying she doesn't believe that, like, she believes the crazy stuff she was saying, but she did not believe that there are two sexes. So she's referring to male and female, and she hates that. She has said that she worries at night that the work she's doing at the ACLU is reifying the gender binary because for a while they were only referring to male and female. Like in a sneaky way, they weren't really saying there are two genders, but they'll say examples of genders are male and female. And that drives Chase up a wall because she thinks non-binary is the most important gender. And she wants to be talking about queers. But they were trying not to scare the judges. And that's what she was doing in front of Ross too. And she has said she does not like that. She feels nervous. She rationalizes it and says, well, it's still in service of the greater good because it destabilizes what it means to be female when you say that somebody with a penis is female. But this makes her very uncomfortable to be going out in her normal face. And that's what she was doing for the New York Times. Like they told her she had to. And so she sucked it up and she acted normal and she pretended to think that gender identity is innate. She does not believe that. She doesn't even think they should be using the term gender identity. She thinks that is bullshit. She thinks sex itself is a construct and they should just be saying that sex is a construct. It's not real. It's whatever you say it is. And then you can choose to like accessorize. I mean, she doesn't say it in a rational way, but yeah, she says sex is a construct. And she wishes they didn't pretend there was a difference between sex and gender identity. But then with Ross, she answers him in this way that was very clearly rehearsed 100 times with her colleagues, where she said, yes, sex assigned at birth is totally different from gender identity. These are two different concepts. And gender identity is, it's an idea, but it's also based on biology because of fetal hormones. She does not believe that. She doesn't even believe in that as a strategy. So that's why she looked so uncomfortable because she felt that she was selling out the queer movement that she believes in for
Well,
this
she did.
sort
I
of,
mean, she
yeah.
did sell them out. She did sell them down. I mean, like,
But the
Well,
queers are totally unprincipled anyway, so I don't even know what it means to sell out as a queer. Like, oh, you lied? Big deal. Like, they don't believe in truth. They literally don't believe in truth.
Yeah, it's true. Truth is subjective. Yeah.
Corey, jump in.
I mean, she's being a team player. That's good, right? No,
Which
I mean,
team?
I'm serious because sometimes when you're put thrust into a role where you're the figurehead for a whole organization, you can't go out there and be a solo act. You have to go and give the organization's consensus view and not your personal view. So that's just something that we should understand.
And respect.
Yeah.
Did she? Well, okay, I'm going to do this real quick. So I pulled up the comments, which they did open the comments on this one. Um, I'll just give you a little taste of the readers' picks. The most upvoted was from Mark in North Carolina. Thank you, Mark. He wrote, I consider myself fairly liberal. As a gay man, I support anyone's right to live as they choose. What feels different about the transgender rights movement is that it isn't just about leaving people alone. We also had to change our own language for how we address others, pronouns, and what I call myself, cisgender. I understand wanting to respect someone else's pronouns, but I never asked everyone in the 1980s to end their signature with gay or straight. I I have also had a crazy online discussion with some trans activists who explain that it is transphobic for gay men to not have sexual relations with transgender men. I'm sorry, but telling me that my sexual preferences are irrelevant is a non-starter. And then when I scroll down, the top 5 or 6 are all completely on whatever our side is. So if the comments mean anything, I still think that the average reader or listener of the New York Times represents the general, what we know most people think. But do you think she left that and the people that sent her in to do that interview thought she did a good job?
Yeah, I think she pulled it off. And sorry, Lauren, you sounded a little optimistic to me when you said that people would notice how scammy her definition of gender and sex were. I think most people are totally baffled and they'll just hear Chase speaking in like a reasonable tone, in like the style of logic, if not actual logic. And they'll be like, I understand this better now. And I'm so glad that everyone's having a dialogue about it.
Ross did Ross did push a little bit and say things like, you're claiming now, I know, you're claiming now you're open to compromise and a dialogue, but could you imagine how some of us felt for those like 4 years when you all
What a
acted like
waste of
crazy
time.
people?
Like that was just giving her more opportunity to recite her lines about how she's grown. Like it really doesn't matter. Like you got to get to the merits of the case. If you only have 1 hour or less with Chase Strangio, you do not waste it being like, oh, but you called us names 5 years ago.
Oh, Lordy. Okay. Oh goodness, I had one more follow-up about Chase here. Um, Goodness, I'm gonna
We
it
we
left
should
my.
we should try to get her to come talk to us.
Well, I have talked. I mean, I've spent a day with Chase, but
No, I mean
Chase.
in this format.
Oh, you mean not when I'm being like t torn apart by the ACLU by 8 attorneys attacking me?
Correct. I
There,
was thinking a different forum.
yeah, I don't. I mean, if you have her email address, please feel free to reach out and ask her. We can all ask her. I don't see this is the thing. I don't see it happening. Same way, I'm gonna say I don't see Ross having Glenna come in or Karadansky come in or me come in and talk about this issue.
Yeah, the New York Times, yeah.
No, but if this is the rollout of the kinder, gentler trans, I guess the New York Times is going to let them try this iteration and pivot.
Yeah, I mean, I at this point, I just see the New York Times as putting on a show of inquiry into the truth while strategically avoiding asking questions that would reveal, like Glenna said, the actual physical damage that these interventions are doing, the actual social damage that this is doing in terms of women's rights and women's sports. I mean, it seems like a show to me. Everything they do is so kid gloves, even when they do come out. I mean, I was happy to see a little bit of pushback from Ross, but I mean, maybe you're right, Glenna. If you're not deep in this and have all of the knowledge that we have, you're not going to be able to pull out all of the illogical trains of thought. You're not really getting a proper measurement of why this is such a big issue for so many people. If you're not understanding the physical damage that is being done, especially to young people, but just people's bodies in general, and then the downstream consequences of that, these medical interventions being so long term, and then the downstream social effects of having people who resemble the opposite sex incurring, invading women's spaces, women's sports, etc. Um,
We have
So
about
yeah,
3 minutes left. I want to ask the
still
question.
disappointed in the New York Times. Still could do a better job. Yeah.
Okay, I have one kind of closing question here, probably for Glenna, maybe for all of us. Um, do you think that the ACLU, who has, isn't it their sports cases that are going forward January? Okay.
Yep.
Are is this an attempted effort to salvage anything about those cases? Do we think they've changed their, are they changing their strategy? Like what do we know about those cases?
Yeah, I think that's a good point that those are coming up and they're very worried about how that's going to go. They definitely think they're going to lose Hecox, which is the one where it's just self-ID, a man who, had not used puberty blockers. We know they're worried about that because they tried to get it dismissed and they failed. So I think they did do a regrouping after Scarmetti because earlier this year, like in February, March, when they were filing lawsuits against the Trump administration, I noticed that they were more extreme and queer than ACLU's past litigation. And I think this was Chase had gained more power after having, argued Scarmetti before the Supreme Court. And I think that there's probably her influence where they said, okay, we'll let you file your non-binary lawsuits. We used to pretend non-binary doesn't exist. Now you can be open about it. But not just Scarmetti itself, but all the media coverage that surrounded it. I think even though I think it was still way too mild, especially from the New York Times, uh, I've written about that. So I think that even the mild criticism of Chase and the ACLU that came out after Scarmetti made them think, okay, we need a new strategy. And so they huddled and blah, blah, blah. And they are worried about how the conservative justices are going to ask questions in January because it's like they know they're going to lose, but it's also a matter of how the media covers it. And we know that this gets on, the cable news and everywhere else, social
Yeah.
media,
Yeah.
with sound bites from the conservative justices. So they could just be destroyed. And it's not
Excellent.
going to be Chase this time, as far as we know, the counsel of record for them is going to be Chase's colleague, Joshua Block, who is a man who's been there a while. It's been, he's big in that world, but we haven't seen his face so much. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays.
Oh God, there's this really old IWW song called Oh Mr. Block. If you're an old card carrying worker of the world, the phrase goes, Oh Mr. Block, you were born by mistake. It's an interesting song. Okay. On that not relevant note, Glenna, I think we should have you back in a couple weeks to talk about that Supreme Court case. If you're
Oh
game.
yeah, I know.
All right. Do your reading. Thank you for being with us today, and we will see you next time.
Could I
Thank you for
shout?
having me.
Could I
Yes,
shout out?
yes, do your shout out, Corey.
Yeah, I want to shout out our production team really quick. First of all, Glenna, thank you. Sorry, I interrupted your thank you. But I want to shout out our production team. They prepare us so far ahead with a bunch of notes and references and everything. And Glenna, please go ahead. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, I just wanted to thank you guys for a good time as always, but I want to hear about your production team.
They're great. They really are. They're great. They prep us every week, all week. They put out the newsletter. They help us with post-production. And we have an amazing team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Welcome back to Informed Dissent. Today we are joined by a second guest. Today we have Ben Ryan with us. Ben, you have covered a lot in the world of HIV, public health, medicine, and LGBTQ issues for decades. Our audience knows a whole lot about gender medicine, but many don't have a solid grounding in the history of HIV services, PrEP, or how AIDS service organizations, I'll probably start calling these ASOs, evolved into the major LGB institutions that we know of today. So we wanted to bring you in to help us build sort of this foundation for some of our listeners. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I wanted to say a disclaimer that we talked about, which is that you guys have your roles as activists, and I have my role as covering the stuff you do. So I agree to come on just with a certain idea that's a barrier where I'm talking to you guys as podcasters and more about the HIV stuff today to try to put the trans and pediatric gender medicine more or less aside just for this conversation.
Absolutely. And I actually think you can help. I really do think so much of the history is so important to how we got to this cultural moment
Hmm.
in time. So I want to start with a couple things, and I want to be really cognizant for our listeners today that you and I probably, of the four of us now, know the most about HIV, PrEP,
Hmm.
ASOs. I want us to be really aware, like Corey or Lauren, like if we're using a phrase or a word that
Yeah.
you're like, jump in and
Well,
just say, hey, define this, slow this down.
just if people don't know, so what PrEP is, PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. And that involves, initially, there was just one type, which is you take one pill once a day, a drug called Truvada. It was approved in 2012 in the United States. And Truvada, it's a combination tablet that includes two antiretroviral drugs that, when taken daily, reduces the risk of acquiring HIV by more than 99%. So it's highly effective. And more recently, there are two different injectable drugs. There's one called Apretude, which is given every other month, and then there's a new one called Yeztugo, which is given every 6 months. And they're all, if you follow, the protocol for each of them, they're all equally extremely effective, almost eliminating your risk of HIV, with the exception of perhaps some drug-resistant strains that are circulating out there. But the difference is that on a population level, the injectable drugs work better because people are just better able to adhere to the protocol, going in twice a month or every other month rather than having to take a pill every day. So, unfortunately, though, the newer ones, the injectable drugs, are very expensive. So, it's harder to get insurance coverage for them. The one, Yeztugo, was just approved this year. So it's really unclear of whether insurers will cover it and also just whether it'll be rolled out successfully. So that's a big question mark right now.
Excellent. So you're giving us that kind of current where we're at with PrEP.
Mhm.
I'm going to go way back in time for a minute.
Mhm.
Can you talk about what a Ryan White program is and how
Yeah.
it came to be named a Ryan White
Mhm.
program?
So AIDS was the first signs of it were identified in 1981. And so there was a long period of figuring out what's going on. There was a lot of lack of attention in the federal government and the Reagan administration in particular. And ultimately, long story short, things started to improve with the government's attention to this issue during the late. Do you want to pause just because you kind of went out for a second?
No, please,
No,
please
Okay.
go
I'm
ahead.
here. I
Oh,
have a
okay.
cramp in my foot and I need to stand up to get it out. I've been sitting
Okay.
too long.
So by the George H.W. Bush administration, things were at least better than they were under Reagan with the federal government's attention to this issue. And in 1990, they passed the Ryan White Care Act. So this was initially supposed to be an emergency funding, but ultimately became a permanent facet of the federal government's support of HIV treatment and care services. So since the early 2000s, it's just essentially been flat funded. If you adjust for inflation, it's been slightly declined. But right now, it's about $2 billion, $2.6 billion a year that go to support different clinics that support low-income people with HIV's care and services. So it's called the payer of last resort. So if you don't have insurance or you don't have enough insurance, the right kind of insurance, or the insurance doesn't cover certain what's called wraparound services, which of course, Jamie, you know all about because you used to be a case manager. So what's found is that the clinics that are supported by Ryan White funding, the metrics of how well people do on HIV, specifically whether they're on medication for HIV to treat it and they're virally suppressed, meaning that their viral load has been suppressed to an undetectable level, which is the key indicator of successful HIV treatment. Those numbers tend to be better at Ryan White funded clinics. So there's a lot of metrics to show that this money is essentially well spent, but it's really in peril right now with the still unresolved budget for the next year in the federal government. The House budget wants to cut like $2 billion in HIV care prevention services, including like almost the entirety of the HIV prevention budget of the CDC. So they would want to cut about 20% of the budget for Ryan White. So that's really up in the air, but people generally feel that probably the Senate will stop this from happening. But who knows right now with everything that's going on in Washington.
Can can you do this for the
Mhm.
listeners who either didn't live through the AIDS crisis
Mhm.
or were not even paying any attention? Ryan White was named after a kid
Yeah. So Ryan
who,
White, yeah, was a boy, he was a hemophiliac living in Indiana. And it's a little uncomfortable because he was essentially the example of the innocent, whereas
Yep.
gay men or people who inject drugs, there were the people who were perceived to have gotten it due to having done something stigmatized, gay sex or injecting drugs, whereas pretty much all the hemophiliacs in the 1980s got HIV because the it's the
The blood
platelets.
supply.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
blood. So they would pool a large number of donors in order to get it's platelets, right? That the hemophiliacs can't produce, and so just mathematically, that means that inevitably you're going to get HIV in the blood supply because the blood supply wasn't being tested until the mid 1980s. The HIV test was first approved in 1985. So Ryan White very famously, was stigmatized at his school. He was kicked out of the school. And so it became this cause celeb, like, Elton John became friends with him, Michael Jackson, all these kind of things. So it was the Ryan White Care Act was named after him, and he ultimately died, I think, in the early 1990s. But he, became this example of the unfairness of the stigmatization towards people with AIDS. And if for up to me, I think maybe I'm gonna name it after more than one person and not just like the kid who didn't deserve it, because it implies that everyone else kind of did deserve it, that you highlight. And it wasn't really until like a baby got HIV. I don't remember what year it was, but then Rock Hudson was diagnosed with HIV. And those two things really exploded HIV in the mid 1980s into the larger public consciousness because they could no longer cordon it off and say, like, well, that's a disgusting homosexual thing.
Well, Rock Hudson was gay.
He was gay, but he was perceived to be very heterosexual. So there was that, it sort of breached that boundary, indeed.
Yeah.
People
So
like wanted to know if Doris Day had kissed him in film or something. Like, if that was like she could get AIDS from that kind of thing.
yeah, so
Well,
I mean, go ahead, Corey.
just to contextualize that a little bit. In 2020, we didn't know how COVID was spread,
Mm-mm.
and we ended up doing a lot of really silly things at a societal level, like putting 6 feet apart from us in the grocery stores while we're standing in line. So when we look back and we judge how people were making decisions around people who had HIV, use your recent experiences
Yeah.
looking backwards to try to understand how people treat something that seems life-threatening in a very low information environment.
Also, there were distinct differences in the use of shame to moderate people's behavior. The gay community collectively agreed to not use harm reduction messaging, to not use shame-based messaging to get people to use condoms. It was sort of a communal effort, that kind of thing. Whereas, some of the same characters from that world went all in on shame-based messaging when it came to getting people to get vaccinated or whether they're going to leave their house or whatever it was. And then we saw monkeypox, and again, some of the same people just switch right back to the other messaging, and really just suggested that we weren't. It was stigmatizing to somehow. Sorry, one second. To ask gay men to change their sexual behavior, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I worked in an AIDS service. I've worked in AIDS service organizations actually for probably a little bit over a decade. One of the organizations that I worked in started out way before the Ryan White program or any of this federal funding existed. It started out as a true grassroots effort. It was a nonprofit that started out two aspects of it. One of them was a meal train service. So they're setting
Hmm.
up food delivery meal
Yeah.
trains
It's like
to,
God's love we deliver kind of thing.
right. So we saw programs where hot meals would be delivered every day to individuals who were dying of AIDS. And then
Mm.
the other program that developed at this grassroots level um, was about pets.
Mm.
It was making sure that if you had a pet, that you
Mm.
knew when you died that there was already somebody who was,
Mm.
I don't know why I'm going to cry about the dogs,
Yeah,
right? But that you knew somebody was going to step up and care for your pet so that you could keep your pet with you and you didn't have to feel
right.
you had to rehome your
It's
animal.
just state planning for pets. Yeah,
Right, it was.
yeah,
But
yeah,
for these were things that just grew up organically out of the community.
yeah,
Oftentimes, too, this was one of the first times where I think we saw lesbians and gay men starting to interact in a different way because a
yeah.
lot of those meal programs were started by lesbians who were cooking food and bringing it. So this is kind of how some of these grassroots efforts grew up. These early community responses have completely evolved into these
Right.
large, well-funding institutions that we see today.
The
Can
ones
you
that
talk a
survived.
little bit
Yeah.
about what is
Yeah.
340B funding? What are
Mhm.
some of these funding
Yeah.
mechanisms that either fall under Ryan White or parallel to Ryan White?
And just an aside, props to lesbians because of any risk group in the United States or anywhere, they have the lowest risk of HIV. So it really spoke well of that community that they stepped up, during the height of the AIDS crisis. And that was something that I started doing HIV work in high school. I was 17. It's called the Northwest AIDS Foundation at the time, in Seattle, where I'm from, and it was just really well balanced between gay men and lesbians and some straight people. So that was a very nice sort of sense of the gay community, the positive end of the gay community. That sort of introduction to me when I was a teenager. So initially there was the ASO model, AIDS service organizations, and they were in cities all over the country, and they did a fairly good job of raising money from individual donors at the time because it was such a crisis. And there were AIDS walks and AIDS rides and all of the AIDS dance-a-thons. So I was involved in a lot of those when I was younger. But in 1996, combination antiretroviral therapy comes out, and HIV is transformed finally from a fatal diagnosis, or AIDS being a fatal diagnosis, to a treatable condition. And that leads to a decline in fear, and that changes people's behaviors. And it also leads to declining interest in giving donations and going on AIDS walks because it was no longer a crisis. So it only makes sense. So especially after the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, it established a system called what's called a federally qualified health center, an FQHC. And essentially it gave incentives where you would get higher Medicaid reimbursement if you were an FQHC, and there are certain criteria to qualify as one. And so a lot of these different ASOs, they started either they had a clinic already that was more narrowly focused on HIV, or they started them, but to qualify under the FQHC status, they had to expand their services. So they might expand into obstetrics or something, but to serve like low income, communities, people, underserved communities, that sort of thing. So you'll see like APLA or Whitman Walker, they'll add the word health to their title around this time in the early 2010s. And that's what that's for. The health is a signal to the federal government that they're an FQHC. And so the ones that were savvy were able to transform. You see like Howard Brown, Harlem United, GMHC is, of course, the world's or the nation's first ASO, founded by Larry Kramer and others, although he was ultimately kicked out for his difficult personality. So that was a big changeover. And I think that, some people might pejoratively refer to it as mission creep, but it was very much on purpose in order to survive financially. So last month, or it was late October, we saw Fenway Health, which is a very big LGBTQ center, LGBTQ community health center in Boston. They stopped providing gender transition treatment to people under the age of 19, otherwise minors, because the Trump administration had been threatening them and others that they would lose their FQHC status if they violated Trump's executive order not to provide this type of treatment. So 340B is a system that was based on a drug law established in 1992. And again, it's similar with community health clinics that serve sort of underserved populations. They qualify for this drug pricing scheme. So how it works is that they'll have a pharmacy attached to their system, and they'll buy a drug at a discount. And there's a formula by which this drug is discounted. So it could be, like 20 to 50% off. And it's sort of, there's a benchmark to the CPI and all this kind of thing, consumer price index. So they'll buy it at this lower rate, but then they'll get reimbursed by whomever, whatever insurer at the higher rate, and they get to keep the difference. So ideally, if they're doing it correctly, this money is supposed to go into their services. There are some maybe are not following those rules, but it's created this huge, nobody really likes it, and it wasn't necessarily meant to prop up the whole system this way, but HIV in particular, in part because of PrEP, but also HIV treatment, is very reliant on this funding stream. So it also, unfortunately, though, creates a perverse incentive for the doctors to prescribe more expensive brand name drugs. So Truvada these days, the brand name version costs like $2,000 a month, whereas you can get generic Truvada for like $20 to $30 a month. And there's also Descovy, which is another daily pill approved for use as PrEP, which in theory has lower toxicities to bone and kidney health. But in reality, is like if you're not sort of older, if you're just like a young, healthy guy, don't have any kidney or bone problems, like there's no a clear clinical benefit to this more expensive brand name version because there's no generic of Descovy. So you'll see that Descovy makes up a substantial proportion of PrEP prescriptions. And you're like, well, why? This isn't really necessary. It's very expensive. It costs everybody more money. And part of that could very well be because of these perverse incentives at these types of clinics. So
Okay,
they're
so I'm gonna
favoring prescribing the brand name drugs for their own benefit, not necessarily for the patient.
okay, so I'm gonna jump in for a moment and just kind of take what you've just talked about and bring
Hmm.
it down to like a personal level.
Hmm.
Little old me, St. Louis, working in AIDS service organizations. So we, as case managers, understood, we knew about this 340B program. We talked a lot about it. You're absolutely right. Where I worked had a space in the back where all of the case managers were in their little cubes. We had a pharmacy in the front. We had a clinic
Hmm.
space.
Right.
Individuals would come in. The case managers had to make sure that the individuals met the real basic criteria to be in the Ryan White program, to
Hmm.
receive the 340B, to receive meds. They would come into clinic, they'd get their blood drawn, they'd get their meds right there. We created these whole wraparound programs. You
Right.
could get meal services, you could get clothing, you could get other STI testing. I had housing programs available.
Hmm.
I had programs if you couldn't pay your utilities for the month, I could get your utilities turned back on or kept on. I had a lot of tools at
Hmm.
my disposal from a social work perspective
Yeah.
because of that 340B
And
money.
And a lot of people might be hearing this being like, that's a lot of money. Like, look at all these handouts. That's kind of like the Republican attitude. So my question for you, is for you the proof in the pudding that like this is money well spent because these HIV tends to infect people who are already very vulnerable. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. And so to keep them healthy, they need a lot of extra support. So, in your opinion, is that money well spent because of a genuine need as opposed to something that, people on the right might just consider to be a handout that people don't quote unquote deserve?
That's a great question. So I think it's twofold. So one, having that pool of resource and programming, what it does is it does drive patients to it was a place they wanted to come to
Hmm. Right.
because it wasn't just a place where you come and see me as your caseworker and I say, "Oh, well here's 15 phone numbers. You can start calling around and seeing if anybody can help you
Yeah.
get your gas turned back on. It's the middle of winter and you're freezing." Instead, it was I they knew that working with your case manager could get that service. But the other thing that was really important was that every time I met with one of my clients, there was an educational aspect. We were talking
Hmm.
about nutrition, health, making sure you were taking your medication every day, making sure, you were. I was working with people and I thought in a system that really was trying to provide them long-term benefit too.
Hmm.
Our system was also not one of those that punished you if you started working.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
you got a job and you got
Yeah.
private insurance, that's why Ryan White was always the payer of last resort. We
Right.
wanted you to get on your feet. We wanted you to do well, and we weren't
Yeah.
going to cut you off.
I
Whereas
mean,
some
it's a
of
teaching to fish kind of situation.
yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was teaching.
Yeah.
But I will say that the other thing it did is it did create this large discretionary kind of pool of revenue
Hmm. Right.
that
The
does
340B did.
the
You had an
340B
incentive
did.
to bring in patients to get the money to support your operations.
But I also think part of why when people ask me, well, how did some of these gender programs roll into these
Hmm.
HIV drivers? They had these pools of resources to do what they would see as innovative treatments or new
Right.
treatments. And I will say scientifically, we did see that when you think about who has higher rates of HIV,
Transgender women
it's
are the top,
yes,
even higher
it's
than gay men.
yes,
Yeah.
it's
And you'll see numbers
exactly.
like 45% in some trans women in whatever community, whereas, the highest you'll see in gay men is maybe a quarter or something. Although those studies, what they do is they go out like gay pride events, in cycles every 3 years at the CDC. I don't know. I don't think they're going to do this anymore, mind you, under RFK. He's obliterated all these kind of regular assessments, but they go to sort of like places where gay men will tend to congregate. And the thing is that oversamples a certain type of gay men, and it doesn't get like the hermits back at home. So I tend to think when you see these percentages of the CDC, like, oh, a quarter of gay men in major metropolitan areas have HIV. I tend to think that might be a little high, but nevertheless, it's substantial.
So
So can
I
I just
Yeah.
oh,
can I jump in here to your point about kind of overestimating how many gay men have HIV? I just like anecdotally, um, m- I would say most of my gay male friends are the hermit kind of,
Hmm.
or strictly
Yeah.
monogamous type, or people that are not having a lot of um, nameless, faceless sex. They're not
Yeah.
going to like group orgies. They're not having multiple partners. Um, but and I'm 42, and so these would all be in my age cohort, relatively close. They all have kind of an underlying anxiety about HIV
Hmm.
that has prompted them to go on PrEP.
Hmm.
And my question to them is always, but you're not really at risk. You stay in
Hmm.
monogamous relationships. You're not out there going to sex parties. You barely go out
Hmm.
to clubs and bars, but they have this like I think societally induced uh, anxiety about
Hmm.
contracting HIV, and they end up going on PrEP, which to me is medicating someone for a disease that they do not have.
Well, to
And
flip
for
it, that's also one of the reasons it's hard to get people who really would stand to benefit from PrEP to take it in the first place. Because young and carefree people, don't tend to think 10 years ahead. And so they're not going to think, oh, I should take a medication for something I don't have. So that's a barrier that people in the HIV prevention world are running up against all the time. And it's like, why can't we get young gay black men to take this in particular? But I guess the question is like, what downside is there to taking Truvada every day for these men?
Well, that was where I was leading with this. Like,
Yeah.
what are the actual side effects? Because I know with
Yeah.
my friends that take it, they have to go in, I think, every 3 months to have their labs
Yeah.
drawn.
Right.
So, what is the actual side effects or risks
Hmm.
to taking something for, especially for someone who, and there are plenty of gay men who are monogamous and have
Hmm.
safe sex practices and are not out there in high risk situations all
Hmm.
the time. Is this kind of an overreaction to a kind of societally induced
Yeah.
anxiety that doesn't really exist anymore? And does it
Hmm.
really benefit them? Like, are the costs of or the risk of taking this medicine every day for
Hmm.
life possibly outweighing the benefit of maybe the off
Yeah.
chance of contracting a virus?
Well, I guess so what we do is there's the cost. So if you're just taking Truvada, the generic Truvada, the cost is nominal. So that's not really it's $20, $30 and probably doesn't cost it wouldn't cost you anything out of pocket either, due to various laws. So the side effects, initially there are somatic side effects that for most people go away within a few weeks, like headache and gastrointestinal stuff. You're like a little nauseous, that kind of thing, maybe some malaise. Most people tends to go away pretty fast. Long term, there's, like a slight decline in bone density and a potential slight decline in kidney function. But the question is, do these lead either to fractures or actual kidney disease? So from what I've seen, and some people, waging lawsuits against Gilead, which makes the drug, would dispute this, but there's no evidence that your basic healthy person is going to have a clinically significant outcome of that, such as a fracture or kidney disease. So, and there was one paper that came out that said compared the safety of Truvada to aspirin. And I think a lot of the concern about safety to do with PrEP is interwoven and inextricable from people's anxiety about sex and gay sex and HIV in general. So there are a lot of other things, like statins or something that we don't spend this much time obsessing over, are they going to hurt us in some way? But that
And
said,
then,
for people with HIV who do take the key drug is it's called tenofovir, which is the tenofovir is like the most commonly used antiretroviral in the world, and it's Gilead makes it. And there are two different kinds. There's the older version, which is in Truvada, and there's a newer version, which is in Descovy. So that's the drug that can cause these kidney disease and bone mineral density loss. But research suggests that it really was only a problem in people with HIV who took it with what's called a boosting agent. And a boosting agent is something that is they put in, a triple combination therapy to treat HIV that boosts the drug levels of the other drugs. It affects the way they're metabolized in the liver. It essentially slows that down. So research suggested that really the problem was when combined with a boosting agent, which is not in just in Truvada, was the thing that was causing all of these bad side effects. And you'll talk to people, who are longtime HIV survivors, and they've had terrible fractures, they're shattered, their ankle and never repaired properly or something like that. So, but those anxieties don't necessarily apply very well to people without HIV.
Okay, I want
Mhm.
to take Lauren's like train of thought and I want to
Mhm.
come back a little bit historically though. So when PrEP first lands, what did that mean
Mhm.
medically and culturally? What did it
yeah,
Yeah. So it
that's
was
where I was
approved
going with
yeah,
this.
it was approved in July of 2012. And then there was this period of silence where no one really did anything. Nobody was on it. And then there was this period starting in 2014 where all of these magazine articles came out and said, why is no one taking PrEP? And a lot of those articles got people interested in it. And then so there's been a steady increase in its use over the years. But in general, people who use it tend to be more affluent, white, gay men, major urban areas. People who are Latino or Black gay men tend to use it at lower rates, especially compared to the need, because the rate of infection in Black and Latino gay men is so much higher than white gay men. And I tend to only discuss gay men when I talk about PrEP because, like, something like 95% of the people who use it are gay men. So there are efforts to try to get, especially like Black women in the South and certain communities to use it. But there's a figure which is called the number needed to treat in medicine. And it's the number needed to treat for 1 year to prevent one outcome. So like whatever it might be for Lipitor to prevent a heart attack, and something like 80 or something like that. The number needed to treat for PrEP for certain gay men, there was a study in London that came out in 2016, and the NNT, as it's called, was something like 12. These guys, were such extraordinarily high risk that all it took to prevent one HIV infection was to give PrEP to 12 of them for 1 year. So whereas no one has ever calculated the NNT for black women in black women in the South because it would be enormous, which means that you're essentially looking for a needle in a haystack, and that means it's not cost effective. And it's not very politically correct to discuss these things, and people spend a lot of money and energy trying to get women to take PrEP, but it's not financially efficient, essentially. Whereas gay men, it absolutely is. It could be even cost savings because it costs, like over 100, $200,000 to treat somebody with HIV for life. So in any case, PrEP started to weave its way into the gay culture in the mid 2010s. So I think there's a positive peer pressure effect that came about, especially with Grindr, where essentially it was your key to entry in order to be involved in sexual discourse in whatever town you're living in. You pretty much have to be on PrEP or you're a pariah. So that really got, a lot of the communities really ingrained with using PrEP. And so we've seen a steep drop off in HIV transmission amongst white gay men, but not so much amongst Black and Latino gay men. And there's another sort of hidden effect, which is something that I was always worried about. And finally, there was a paper that came out about this that I reported about in the New York Times a couple years ago, which is as PrEP accelerated the existing decline in condom use. It was already on the decline because people weren't as afraid of HIV anymore. There were those people who in turn became more at risk because they got on the bandwagon with what's sort of the cultural norms about using condoms, but they weren't using PrEP, therefore they became more likely to get it. So that's not necessarily the largest group of people, but it is sort of unfair that they sort of got brought along with this cultural tide, but without the benefits that other people were enjoying.
Can I also ask or bring up two other things? So one of the things I observed in working in HIV care, working with PrEP, is that that steep decline in condom use led to other infections come back or rise.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we saw a decent amount of syphilis,
Syphilis,
and we
gonorrhea,
saw a
chlamydia. Yeah.
decent
Hmm.
amount of treatment-resistant gonorrhea was starting to
Hmm.
pop back up, and chlamydia. So
Yeah.
these other, STIs, sexually transmitted infections, um, rising rates. Do you think
Yeah.
that providers minimize those risks? Do you think
If
that
they
when a
ever.
provider starts someone on PrEP these days, is it really made clear like
Yeah.
condom
Well,
use?
it's really hard to prove tease apart cause and effect. And there was, there at least one modeling study I remember from the mid 2010s. And just as background, so I was the science reporter at Pause Magazine from 2012 to 2020. So my job was just to like ingest every single study that came out of HIV. So I've written something like 350 articles about PrEP. So I had this little feather in my cap that I've written about PrEP more than anyone in the world. So if you ever want to know about PrEP, come to me. But it's
Which is what we did.
one,
We came to
yeah,
you.
here we are. So part of the problem is that people who go on PrEP, because of going on it, because you have to come in every 3 months for your labs, that means you're probably going to increase your rate of testing for STIs, which means that if you get them, you'll decrease the amount of time that you're infectious because you'll get treated faster. So, there's a lot of debate over the years of whether that actually would decrease the rate of STIs. But, you know, all we can say is that as PrEP use has increased, and there's, maybe like 250,000 gay guys in the country that are using it at any point in a given year right now, STIs have soared. But that's also coincided with declining investment in the United States in local STI clinics and that sort of thing. So public health clinics have declining money to spend in this sort of thing. And in the late 1990s, syphilis was so rare that there were public health experts that were talking about possibly, getting to an elimination status in the United States. But it's been up on the up and up, and it's not that severe of infection. If you get it relatively early, you can treat it easily. It's fine. What it is a
Which
problem for
one?
is syphilis, is
Okay.
congenital syphilis. So, transmits to heterosexuals. And so women who are pregnant, there's a very high rate of congenital defects, and even death from syphilis if women don't get treated when they're pregnant, if they have it. And it's also a problem because if they get treated and their partner does it, and then he just goes right back and reinfects them, that's a problem. And there's only one drug called Bicillin LA. It's this big injection, and there was a shortage of it 2 years ago. There was only one manufacturing site in Michigan that made it for the entire country. And so they had to ration it and only, favor it for pregnant women. But it's better than the alternative because it's just a single shot. You can get it done and make sure that people are treated fully. Otherwise, they have to take a certain number of pills for a certain period of time. But, it has PrEP actually increased the rate of STIs. I don't think anyone could ever prove it, but again, as PrEP use has increased, STIs have soared because I think part of it is that PrEP has influenced the behavior of other people beyond just people who are on it. It's created a cultural norm where condoms are just out the window. And you see it also in the porn, I think, that was made during this period of time. You'll see a shift somewhere, in the mid to late 2010s, where condoms all of a sudden just vanished from porn. And a lot of porn during that time started to be homemade as well. All the big companies are kind of going out of business. So, that's where you see the rise of OnlyFans. So condoms are suddenly seen as this big downer, whereas before they were seen as sort of virtue signaling that you were part of the game, you're preventing HIV. So that's something that's really changed in my lifetime, where condoms are essentially uncool. And then, you hear a lot of people say, all of a sudden, there's a very high rate of people saying they have allergies to latex that you never heard about that anymore. So, like, I'm sure, yeah.
Okay, let's go back to culture for a moment. So, do you think that PrEP reshaped norms around monogamy in the gay
Mhm.
male community?
I mean, it's possible. I don't know. If you've heard, there's a documentary called Sex in the 70s, and it's this sort of laudatory documentary with all of these kind of hazy-eyed gay men recalling their insane sex lives in the 1970s. And, And the whole time you're watching it, they're like, yeah, we used to go into the back of these semi trucks and you'd always get your wallet stolen. It was just orgies left and right. And these guys just love this stuff. And you're sitting there being like, okay, well, the party's going to end, come 1981. This is very sad. It's a very ominous message you're sending here. But, they all love this. And if you've ever read the book Faggots by Larry Kramer, it's this romantic left that he wrote in like 1975 or something. And it's essentially about his life living in the midst of these unbelievable orgies. And like the climactic scene is like this little kid named Rusty, and he just gets off the bus from like Louisiana. And like by the end of the night, it's this scene out of Naked Lunch, or this like just he's tied up and they're just orgies and men everywhere. It's just, this is written to be astonishing from the perspective of Larry Kramer, who all he wanted was to fall in love. And in the end, he did, but he had to wrest this guy away from Fire Island and all the orgies and stuff. And just personally, I hear all these stories and I'm like, well, that's nice, but it sounds lonely. Like I'm with Larry on this one. True story, he actually did get the guy, and I met the two of them once, and they were together to the very end. The guy was a dinner party, and his husband was wearing these leather pants, like lovely leather pants, like chaps, but like, he was very much of that era. So I think that like the point of all this is that I think that like gay men's natural state is pretty hedonistic. My mother, when I came out as a teenager, she very wisely said, if there's no woman involved, there's no one to put on the brakes. Because guys, men, when you look at heterosexual and heterosexual and reproduction, men evolved to favor sexual exploration because they're more likely to spread their DNA that way, essentially. Some went a little awry with gay men and they end up being into guys, but they still maintained that interest in sexual variety. AIDS comes along, and that really sort of clamped things down. It's not like people weren't having lots of sex that was, multiple parts of such a thing, but at least reduce things, for a period of time. And then you get rid of the fear, and then you put PrEP into the mix, and then all of a sudden you're kind of back to the 70s, just in a different way for a lot of guys. And mind you, we hear about the multiple sex partner orgy type guys because it's very loud and it certainly gets your attention, but the reality is the percentage of the overall gay male population who engages that sort of behavior is like maybe 15-20%. When you're talking to epidemiologists, they'll call them the core transmitter group. Those are the groups where you really want to pool your resources and do everything you can using harm reduction methods or whatever to try to reduce the spread of infections. Whereas like you look at these studies and like the median number of partners for a gay man or a heterosexual man, as you call them technically, is like 2 or 3 or something. It's just that like there's this core of them who are like really into kind of like wild times.
But there is this
Mhm.
perception, or at least I see it, I see it pop up on Twitter sometimes. I see or I hear from, people within our org, they talk about there's been this push to normalize maybe polyamory more,
Yeah.
or this changing, has there been a changing expectation of the the goal of the gay male
Yeah.
relationship? I hear
It's
these young gay men saying, I just
yeah.
want to find a partner who's not going
Well,
to tell me that they're poly
yeah.
on their first date.
Well, a lot of things happened at the same time. Gay marriage was approved. It started to become legal in different states in the early 2010s and ultimately was legal everywhere until 2015. But this is happening at the same time that Grindr, and Manhunt was, and all like Adam for Adam, all these different online sites that preceded it.
Manhunt,
Yeah, that's
manhunt.
yeah. I don't know if you know that one, but so
Lauren wasn't
online
kicked off that
sex.
one yet for you.
So, those, and we see this all over. We see declining marriage rates in heterosexuals, less interest in marriage. There's some poll that just came out last week, young women aren't interested in marriage. So I think the internet and apps are driving people to be less connected in so many different ways. PrEP, I think, certainly has also played a role in that and just sort of facilitating the ease of casual sex, essentially. But it's impossible to disentangle that from all these other cultural influences. I think we're obviously in a period, Bowling Alone came out, The Anxious Generation, all these books that have documented the way that the internet and other declining participation in different social gathering sites, would be a bit bowling or church or whatever it might be. For me,
Are
like
you saying bowling? Like
well,
bowling?
there was a very famous sociological book that came out in the mid 2000s called Bowling Alone. And it was one of the first books to really identify that people were becoming much more disconnected in culture during,
Oh my
after
gosh.
the advent of the internet. So bowling was the sort of larger metaphor, but it could be anything. It could be a volunteer group, it could be a book group, whatever it might be, a play group with your kids and their parents. So people are much more disconnected these days. So, but I think that's especially acute amongst gay men. And one thing I find frustrating about being gay is, and also being a journalist, is that, heterosexuals' lives are just dissected to death in think pieces and books. And, if you think of it was the late 80s, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. People are constantly discussing, how do we all get along? Whereas gay men's interpersonal conflicts are just never a matter of public discussion. They're really kept quiet, and there's not a place for them in the gay press because the joke I always said is like, unless when I was coming out, Out magazine was just basically Versace models all the time, and the main theme of the gay press was, isn't gay hot and aren't straight people mean? And there was no room in that. And now it's like, aren't isn't queer fabulous or fire or whatever, and aren't cis het people mean? That's kind of what they've gone to now. So nowhere in that is room for discussion of all the dysfunction within the gay community and the frustrations of the things you're describing and the inability to find a relationship if that's what you want, that kind of thing. So
What what are some of those conversations that aren't being had?
I mean, I think that there's just sort of a magnet pulling towards hedonism, and which is kind of a lonely existence, a lot of drug use, this very disturbing use of GHB, which is a drug. I can't remember what it stands for, which is also called G, and it's this little liquid, and it essentially causes a short-term euphoria, be it if you're a dance party or
Wait,
something.
GHB, tell me what is
Yeah,
the
it's a
street name of
drug.
this drug?
It's like gamma hydroxybutylate, or it's something like that. I think
Corey,
that's
do
right.
you know?
One of you could just look it up.
Would you
It's
call
But
it
also
super
it's
poppers?
it's
I
also
think you could call it
been
that.
used as a date rape drug because
It's also a date
it's
rape
a
drug.
liquid,
Yeah,
colorless, tasteless. People get
yeah,
it put in their drink. I actually had a gay male friend that was GHB'd at a
yeah,
club one time, and he woke up in a subway station like very confused. So
yeah. It's very popular. That meth, I think, has remained fairly stable in the gay community. There was a lot of talk of that being a crisis in the 2000s. It's still a big problem. It's still a big facilitator of HIV transmission. A lot of gay guys, once they've experienced sex on meth, they can never go back because it's so fantastic. It changes the wiring of their brain, that kind of thing. I had an ex-roommate who was a, off and on crystal meth addict. And, we go to the beach where all like the sober people were, and like he knew everybody because there's this whole community of people, who have had their lives upended by crystal meth. But GHB, I mean, I have a friend who's like, his friend is a DJ or something, so he's like knows all these party gays, and there are people he says who have to take GHB like all day long. They'll get up, I don't know how common this is, get up in the middle of the night and have to take it because they've become addicted to it. So I think just this, it's a general sort of like Peter Pan syndrome, a lack of growing up. And, you'll see that where it's very hard for, people in middle age and 47 to grow old with that when so much of your self-worth is like, am I desired? I was just watching this movie, Margot at the Wedding, with Jennifer Jason Leigh and Nicole Kidman. And at the time, the actresses were like mid 40s, late 30s. And they're discussing, like, if, so much of your self-esteem is like, am I fuckable? And like that's declining and you get a little bit of that attention. It's like you're going to go for it. And I think that aspect of having to live, based on your looks is extremely difficult for gay men to deal with as that fades. Who are you if you're not desired? So, and I always think of it sort of like you think of those houses in like South Carolina near the beach, they have to put them up on stilts. If your house of your entire self-esteem is like built on one little pillar, am I good looking? Like you're doomed. Whether it's like, you know, am I loved by my family and friends? Like, is my job meaningful? Like whatever it might be, if you have other purposes in life. And I think that there's not people in the gay community, I don't really think favor those other values. It's just like you'll see it like these people that there's a certain type of bland gay guy on Twitter, and it's all they're allowed to talk about is the Real Housewives, references musical theater, and it's really sad to me that it is a certain blandness that's kind of expected of you in this culture. And it's nothing to do with like all the great male creatives from the ages, if it's Stephen Sondheim or whoever it might be. Um, so just that it's just sort of like, are you hot? And like, do you have a great time kind of thing? And there's no room for like connection and that type of mindset.
Did any of that surprise you, Lauren, hearing that, or Corey?
I mean, I have a very biased sample because I live in New York. So, if,
Yeah,
if I lived in like a rural area, it'd probably be very different. So,
I was going to say when we talk about I think we've introduced the term to the culture now, the hermit gaze.
yeah.
That they're not necessarily of that stereotype. And
Yeah.
to be fair, what you're presenting is a stereotype, and also
Hmm.
stereotypes exist because we aggregate all of these observations and say, hey,
Yeah.
a lot of people of this group have these behaviors.
I mean, you should think of sort of like the cool kids in school. Not everyone is doing what their Heathers are doing, but they get a lot of attention, and a lot of people wish they could be in the group, whether they are or not. And so it's that kind of pull. So even if the hermits aren't doing all this stuff, they're aware of it, and even if they don't want to be doing it, they're nevertheless kind of left out of whatever is going to like at the center of the action. But it's hard also because I mean, the generation above me either died of AIDS or is totally traumatized by it. And I paid a heavy price of those people's neuroses, like spilling out over me some very unfortunate behavior when I was younger. But that group of people did not establish hope for what the future might look like. It's very fuzzy. So you don't really know what it's like to grow old as a gay man because there aren't a lot of them. And you were saying something earlier, Lauren. I had this gay therapist when I was in my 20s, and he said that, it was all the A gays who died of AIDS. They were the guys out there having fun, and it was kind of like the geeks who survived because they didn't have all that sex. So it kind of cut out all the exciting, sort of fabulous people, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend that is he's a much older gay man. He's in his mid 70s now, and he lived through the AIDS crisis. He nursed a lot of friends until they died. But he himself was so traumatized, and he was
Hmm.
never the, party gay. He was kind of a boring. I don't think he's boring. He's actually quite
Yeah.
funny, but he was, he worked
Boring
every
on paper.
day. Yeah, boring on paper, but um, after years of watching so many of his friends die, he admits he was completely traumatized by it, and he
Yeah.
did not want to get into relationships with anyone
Hmm.
because he was
Yeah.
just like, he like abstained from any sexual content for almost a decade
Yeah.
because he was just so traumatized by what happened. And I think he carries some of that into his later life. I mean, now he has a partner and they're very happy, but both of them saw, I mean, almost all of their friends die, and it
Hmm.
was in a time where we didn't know much about AIDS, and they died lonely, isolated
Hmm.
deaths, and I think that stayed with a whole generation of gay men.
Yeah.
Well, now that I'm about to cry and we have like 2 minutes left, is there anything else that we should be thinking about, or anything else with the history of aid services or these federal funded
Yeah.
LGBT institutions or PrEP
Well,
that
just
we
that, a
missed?
lot of
Or
this is very much at risk if the federal government, the Republicans in the House have their way. They're looking to destroy the entire HIV prevention budget, which is about $1 billion. And most of it goes to like state and local health departments or local community-based organizations, these ASOs, whatever the form they might be in now. So, the question is, what benefit does that money actually have to public health right now, considering that in the United States, the HIV incidence rate or the annual HIV infection rate that's estimated by the CDC declined only about 12% between, I think it was 2018 and 2022, which if you compare that to like England or Australia, where they've just had like plummeting rates. And the difference really is that they have these like national sexual health clinics. So they have national health care. So the gay men are already used to going to these clinics routinely. So when PrEP came about, they just handed it to them. It was just sort of just add water effect. Whereas the system in the United States is totally chaotic. And it depends on young, healthy people having health insurance and going to the doctor routinely, which is hard to get certain populations to do. So the United States has really done a very poor job of combating HIV compared to other wealthy nations. So sometimes, the cynic in me wonders, like, are you guys actually doing a good job? Or are you just sort of like maintaining your job? This person I know is very cynically said, a lot of these different there's or gay advocacy organizations, when there's a problem that comes up, they're like, well, what are you going to do about it? They're like, we're going to have a webinar. I think the amount of webinars that you see that are put on, it's just sort of like a lot of rah and like just you know proving that we have a point of continuing our jobs, and the professionalization of activism, which you guys, that's what you have done yourself. So, you're not immune to this. And you have to ask yourself, you see these advocacy organizations and like, yeah, we're going to go to Congress and we're going to get this bill and we're going to get all this money to cover PrEP. And you're like, yeah, but it never happened. Certainly not now. And it wasn't even going to happen even when you had democratic control. So what is the point of your organization if it's just a bunch of pipe dreams? So the cynic in me sees this sort of like entrenchment of AIDS Inc., but I'm not seeing the actual benefit when it comes at least to prevention. Treatment, also the metrics in the United States are very bad compared to other wealthy nations. It's something like 55 or 60% of the HIV population is actually on medication and has an undetectable viral load, which is very low. I mean, there are African nations that do way better than this. The benchmark is to get to like 72, 73%, according to these sort of UN AIDS goals that would supposedly lead to this big drop off because treating the virus, also prevents infection. So, we just have a very messy system. So you have to ask yourself, granted, we're spending all this money, but is it being put to good use? Like it's hard to say. So with the lack of it, what impact would that have? I'm not sure if HIV prevention, if nothing else, is basically based on gay men with private health insurance just going to the doctor. Do you actually need all these other organizations? I mean, I'm being cynical. The answer is yes, because the people who need it most are the people, like you're saying, who need a lot of assistance. If they're very low income, they need a bus voucher or whatever it might be. They can't remember to take their pills, need some sort of reminder. It's those people where the money hopefully is well spent. But, it's a little unclear to me about whether this sort of big dream of getting everybody who needs it on PrEP is ever really going to happen.
Well, Ben, we've reached our hour mark. I just wanted to say thank you so much for being willing to
Yeah, it's
come
great talking.
talk to us. I really do think this adds a layer of understanding for a lot of our listeners, that I think is really important. And also you brought it right up to the present.
Mhm.
We have bills going through, our federal government right now talking about what we're spending money on. And I think it's
Mhm.
really important for us to be thinking about these things. So
And
thank
HIV
you.
has historically been very bipartisan. So, that Ryan White was reauthorized every time, on a
Yeah.
bipartisan basis, that all the spending internationally for PEPFAR has been very bipartisan. So, there are other diseases like if it's diabetes that look on HIV with great envy. The amount of money that's spent on
Yeah.
HIV is quite disproportionate to other diseases. Part of that is because it's an infectious disease, so it's a little hard to compare. You can't contract diabetes from somebody, but whether that'll last is really up for debate right now, given the climate in Washington.
Thank you for that.
Thank you,
All right.
Ben.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our guests today, to Glenna Goldis and Ben Ryan. This week was an all-gay show, which I absolutely love. Sadly, there were no cats. All these gays and no cats bothered to make an appearance. Come to think of it, I'm not even sure that Glenna has a cat, but I know what we should send her for Christmas. Before we wrap up, I want to sit for a moment with something that Ben brought up about HIV care, because I think it speaks to a broader theme that I personally keep returning to. So much of what happened in HIV medicine truly came from a place of genuine care. People were trying to save lives, to save their communities, and to respond to an emergency. But we've also seen how a really caring idea over time can go so awry. AIDS service organizations had an influx of funding that created a cushion and some stability. And that cushion, I think, made it too easy for new sets of priorities to move in. When you have the money to expand beyond your mission, I think it's a lot easier to let your mission go awry. I have heard from families about how some of these shifts have played out. At least 2 parents have told me that they discovered that their daughters had started testosterone at the same time that they found bottles of Truvada in their rooms. Their daughters had gone on PrEP. So at the same moment that these girls were being ushered into a medical transition, probably at an organization that was intentionally originally set up to be an AIDS service organization, they were also being pulled into an HIV prevention framework that was never designed for them, and probably they really shouldn't or don't need. We're going to explore this more at the LGBT Courage Coalition on our Substack this week. We're in the works with a powerful firsthand story from a gay man who was canceled from his job in an ASO, a story that's taken him a long time to write, and I think even longer for him and many of us to understand. This is another thread to pull on, another angle for us to think about and understand how we got here. And like so much in this movement, when you start pulling on these threads, you realize how much of what we thought we knew really begins to unravel. So everyone, this week, thank you for listening. Thank you to Glenna, to Ben, to our production team. And thank you to all of you who comment, share, and show up every week. It really matters. If you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe, and share because that gets this podcast out there. And as always, stay informed and ready to dissent.